Hello there my loves, my name is Hannah and welcome to my July wrap-up. I'm addressing the framing, first of all. I promise you this camera is straight. My house is really wonky, so that's why that's going off over there. Socket says hello. Let's talk about books. As usual, we're going to start with some quick headline stats on what I've been reading this month, and then we're going to get into the reviews. I feel like I've had a really nice reading month in July. Not a lot of like outright favourites, but a solidly good month. Like, nothing here was bad. So, shall we get into it? So I read 12 books this month, which is a little below the pace I've had for the first half of the year, and I'm really pleased about that. I wanted to slow down. Of the books that I read this month, the average page length is 350, which I'm really pleased with because I did want to read some bigger books, and I've got a couple of poetry collections in here to talk about today, so they are obviously quite slim, and so the fact that it's still at 350, I'm pretty pleased with. The shortest book I read was around 71 pages. That was a poetry collection. And then the longest was like 760. So I'm reading some of my bigger boys. That's good. If you've been here before, you might know that I also track how long it takes me to finish a book because I am a multi-book reader. So I normally have 4 on the go, normally an audiobook, an ebook, and a couple of physicals, sometimes just like different vibes. I'm a mood reader. So because of that, it does take me a little bit longer to finish anything. And on average, it took me 7.9 days to finish a book, which again is not surprising because my overall number of books that I've read this month is down, and that's a little bit longer than it has been taking me to finish things, but that's probably because I've been reading longer things. So it's all good. I've read from only 4 different countries though this month: England, the USA, Ireland and Turkey. So that's quite, not loving that. I would like a little bit more kind of like country diversity. 3 of the books I read were by authors of colour, so about 25% of my reading. That's not quite where I would want it to be, but it's moving in the right direction from where it has been some months this year. We are blaming the Euros challenge, never mind. But 7 of the 12 books I read were queer or had some aspect of queer rep in them. And the average publication year, every month I pick like different stats to talk about because it's just whatever happens to be of interest that month. And the average publication year, I don't think I talk about this very often, but it's 2019 this month, which is quite contemporary for me. I've read a few books 2 whole books that came out this actual year. I'm normally a bit of a backlist baby, and I normally have some classics. I haven't read any classics this month, so that normally kind of pulls my average publication year back a bit. So I'm feeling very like my finger is on the pulse. I mean, compared to other booktubers, my finger is so far from the fucking pulse, but like for me, I'm feeling bang up to date. That's all the stats. That's all the stats that I'm going to be talking about for now. I'm going to have some coffee. And shall we talk about the books? As normal, I'm going to start with books that you may have seen me talking about in other videos and try and kind of get through them quickly to get to the stuff that you probably haven't heard me talk about before. So the first 4 books that I'm going to talk about were the 4 books that I read for my July Impatient Reading vlog. If you are new here, hi, welcome. I pick a few books every month off of my shelf that I'm just excited to read, and that for one reason or another I may have been putting off or have found excuses to not pick up sooner, or just that I really fancy, and then I force myself to read them in a reading vlog. It is my way of making sure that I get to the books that I really want to read and don't get too distracted by what everyone else is reading, or other reading challenges that are going on, or the Booker Prize, which is threatening. It's threatening to derail my impatient reading for August, but anyway, let's chat about the books that I read in July for that impatient reading vlog. So First up, we've got The Perfect Golden Circle by Benjamin Myers. Benjamin Myers is an author from the Northeast, and that is where I live, the Northeast of England. And I have been slacking this year. Last year, I made it a real focus of my reading to read more authors from the Northeast. And in doing that, I read Cuddy by Benjamin Myers and really, really liked it. It was one of my favourite books that I read last year. And so when I noticed that I hadn't been reading a lot of Northeast authors this year, I thought, well, I must get to The Perfect Golden Circle. And this is quite different. Benjamin Myers is an author, from what I can tell, this is only the second of his that I've read, is that all of the books he writes, he's a bit of a genre hopper. Like, he moves around. Cuddy was very much this sort of epic and experimental historical book. This is, in lots of ways, a much more formally straightforward book. It's actually really quite formulaic. It's quite structured in the sense that we are following two men down in the southwest of England in one very hot summer in 1989. And these are two men who, for whatever reason, feel a bit adrift from society, a little bit outside of things, but they've found a sort of sense of purpose and fulfillment in creating crop circles. And so every chapter of this book is their creation of a different crop circle on kind of consecutive weekends throughout this summer, and it's quite a slow burn book. It kind of does what it says on the tin. I think what it captured really well is the ordinariness of wanting to create a mark on the world, and how when you are an ordinary person, sometimes it feels like you want to leave some kind of legacy behind, but you don't know what is open to you to do that. And I think it explored that really well. They have a really interesting friendship, the two men. They're really quite different. One is dealing with trauma from the Falklands, that he served in the British forces in the Falklands War, and the other one is kind of, he's essentially homeless. He's a bit of a punky guy. He's kind of very I don't know. Do you know what this book reminded me of in vibe? The Detectorists, but with a little bit more political commentary. That's the vibe of this book, and I enjoyed it. Myers' prose, I know, can be quite divisive. It almost always works for me in this. Sometimes it just gets a little bit too chewy, but on the whole, like, I enjoyed it. I didn't like it as much as Cuddy, but it's a great summer read. It's a quick read. Solid. Another really good sort of oppressive summer book is Mrs. S by Kay Patrick, and let me try and hold that in a way that it doesn't get glare on. This is a debut novel by Kay Patrick, and it is, well, I picked this book up. I didn't actually pick it up. This book was thrust into my hands by my best friend Farmer, because Farmer went to school with Kay Patrick. Farmer went to a boarding school in the northwest of England, and so did Kay Patrick. And this book is that school. It's not about real people, as far as I know, but it is very much set like in that school. It's not named, but so Farmer was very excited because she was basically like, oh my god, read this, it'll be like you're going to my school. And I'm like, okay, now I feel like I can picture your school. So I was reading it mostly for that reason, but also because lots of people had said it was a really great kind of like queer yearny book, and it is a great queer yearny book. We are following a young protagonist who is in love with the headmaster's wife. So they've just got a job as a house mistress. So at the boarding school, they're not a teacher, they're there to kind of like take care of the girls and look after them more in like the pastoral time. So they go and work at this school. They're Australian, so they're not kind of from this particular English culture, which is a culture that is very alien to me, but you know. But yeah, so they're very much an outsider, and they go and work as a house mistress at this school, and they fall in love with the headmaster's wife, Mrs. S, and it is about that pretty much. It did take me a little while to get into. There's something in the rhythm of the prose. It's got quite a lot of short sentences, and the chapters, they're not really full chapters, they're just kind of these vignettes that are quite short, like a few pages, or maybe like, some of them are maybe like a little bit longer, like 15-20 pages, but I found when I first picked it up, I was reading it for maybe like 20 minutes at a time, and I wasn't really getting into it, but it did massively improve for me when I was able to dedicate like hours, like a 90-minute reading session to it. Just for me, I sometimes find really short sentences and lots of short sentences a little bit like fatiguing, and I just was crying out sometimes for just a nice long sentence that could really like anchor me into it. I felt a little fatigued sometimes, but I thought the relationship dynamics that are explored in this book were really interesting. I think for me you are so much inside the main character's head, and that is a really uncomfortable place to be sometimes, because they are obsessing about this woman. They are completely obsessed, and so you're getting this very narrow vision of the world. Like, I really wanted to kind of look up and see more of what was going on around, and see and understand more of the people who were involved, but because the central character had such tunnel vision, as the reader, you are forced to have that tunnel vision too. And I think that's intentional, and it is very effective, but I was just getting a bit exhausted by it at some points. There's also this sense of like anonymity to all the so like Mrs. S is Mrs. S, the headmaster is called the headmaster. I don't think we ever know what the protagonist's name is. The girls at the school are just referred to collectively as the girls. The other house mistress is just referred to as the house mistress. So like everyone is very anonymous. So everything that wasn't Mrs. S was incredibly anonymous feeling. And I was sort of simultaneously crying out for both a focus on something that wasn't her, like just give me anything that isn't about Mrs. S, but then also I was just desperate to see Mrs. S sort of with my own eyes rather than through the protagonist's eyes, because I felt like they were so swept up in her that I'm like, oh, I would just love to objectively see what Mrs. S is like from another POV. But yeah, it's a silly complaint really, because that's just not what the book is. But I liked it. It was solid. I would read more books by this author. It's not going to be a favourite, but I liked it. And then the third book I read was Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Evaristo, and I was really excited to get to this because I read Mr. Loverman earlier this year and absolutely loved it. I did a bit of a hybrid read of this, so I did have the physical copy and I read maybe in total like a quarter of the book in physical, but the rest of it I read on audio, and it was narrated by Anna Maria Nabirier. And I was really hyped about this book, and I did like it. It is a multi-perspective novel. It's actually, it's very close to being a interconnected short story collection, but the stories are very connected. So each chapter has 3 sections and they follow 3 different people, a girl, a woman, and another character. So sometimes that is another woman, sometimes it's a non-binary character, sometimes is there sometimes a man? Oh god, I can't remember. But yeah, someone else. So every chapter follows that pattern. And the stories, you slowly realise that the stories are, the individual perspectives are linking together. So there's characters that get called back halfway through the book from like earlier ones, and you're constantly trying to like piece them together, which is why, although I thought the audio was great and the narrator did a really good job, and I really enjoyed the audio listening experience, I was really glad I did also have a physical copy of it, because me being me, losing the plot, I did have to do a little bit of like referencing back and being like, who's that person? But not actually very much. And I think that is what I really liked about the book, is that this should have been the sort of book that I really struggled with. I don't do well with lots of characters. I don't enjoy short stories. But this worked on the whole for me. And I think it is because Bernadine Evaristo is such a specific and careful observer of human beings, and she paints them so carefully in her prose that even though there was a lot... How many characters in this book? Let me do some quick maths. Da-da-da. 3, 6, 9, 12... Okay, maybe... not that many, so 12, but 12's a lot of principal characters. Yeah, so 12 is quite a lot for me, and they did all feel very distinct. Sometimes I forgot people's names, but I never forgot who they were. And that is a sign of good character writing in my book, just based on like how I am as a reader. Through all of the perspectives, you end up with this sort of patchwork narrative of a lot of the times of being a Black British person, mostly in London, but then it does move up to the northeast, and I got so excited by the fact that it moved up to the northeast. But yeah, predominantly in London, and you get all of these different generational experiences, and I thought there was so much care taken to not rest on easy assumptions or easy points of conflict between generations who've had different experiences. I thought everything was very nuanced and very carefully thought out, and I really appreciated that. I did personally feel like there was maybe a couple too many narratives for me. I think that's why I was surprised it was only 12, because for me it felt like more than that. And I think there was one or two that I don't think necessarily like added too much like extra texture to the narrative. And I wasn't 100% sold on there is a sort of narrative that cuts through that hangs everything together, but the emergence of that came quite late in the book, and I wasn't 100% convinced by that. It felt for me like it came a little too late in the day. But I really enjoyed it. I actually put because over on Instagram I always do like a tiny little mini review of every book that I read on my stories, and one of you, Jill, replied when I put this up and said, oh, I liked it, but I didn't like it as much as Mr. Loverman. And she said something that was so true, and I'm stealing it shamelessly, but credit to Jill for saying this, that these two books, Girl, Woman, Other and Mr. Loverman, for her were a really good example of the difference between best and favourite. So I do think, objectively, this is a better book. I can understand why this is the one that won the Booker and not Mr. Loverman, but I vastly preferred Mr. Loverman and would consider Mr. Loverman much more of a favourite book than I would this one. So thank you, Jill, because that helped me in my thinking of the book. And then the 10th? No. We wish I was already on the 10th this many minutes into the video. The 4th book that I read, the final book for the Impatient Reading blog, was 10 minutes and 38 seconds in This Strange World by Elif Shafak. And this was another shortlisted for the Booker Prize. Was it the same year? Oh, it was. I didn't twig that before. So this was shortlisted the year that this won. And this was my first book by Elif Shafak. She's an author that I have been interested in for a little while, but I know that her prose can be quite divisive, a bit like Benjamin Myers. And I hadn't known where I was going to sit. I sort of... There are certain, if you watch, which I assume you do, bookish content online, you'll, even if you don't create that content, you kind of, as a reader, I've got like a number of people that I know I sit somewhere between their spectrums of reading. Like, oh, if it's literary fiction, I tend to agree with this person, but I align myself more with this person if it's like fantasy or whatever. Anyway. And based on triangulating myself within how all of the various other bookish people on the internet feel about Elif Shafak, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to think. Like, she was one of those authors that I couldn't predict how I was going to feel about it based on how other people that I generally overlap with feel about her. So I was interested, I was intrigued, and I loved the premise of this book. So this is a book that's split into two halves, and the first half is is the 10 minutes and 38 seconds after the main character Leila has been murdered, and her consciousness is still sort of around. It's still sort of milling around her body, like she's dead, she has died, but she's sort of, you're almost like living through the life flashing before your eyes as you die moment for the first half of the book. And so you, in that period, you get these episodes of her life that build up a picture of who she was. We know that at the time that she died, she was a sex worker in Istanbul, but we go right the way back to actually like right when she was born. So things that she can't actually probably remember. And I really enjoyed the first half of the book. There was a lot, the memories were all really connected to like the senses. There was a lot of like tasting and smelling, and I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the sort of slightly off the wall kind of construction or like ideas behind the book. I did find in that first section that it got a little bit formulaic, because like once you'd set up, she'd basically set up like it's 1 minute after she's died, 2 minutes after she's died, so you know there's going to be 10 and then a couple of bits for the 38 seconds, and I kind of felt like I didn't actually need some of those, that they were just there in order to make the numbers work. And she's also introducing you through those to who are called the five in the book, so Layla's 5 closest friends and how she's met them. So that's the first half of the book, and then the second half of the book is what is actually happening to Layla's body after death. So it is her body being discovered and her friends waiting outside, her friends finding out that she's died, trying to get custody of her body but not being allowed custody of her body, Layla being buried in this cemetery for essentially like lost souls, like unclaimed people, because only direct family were able to claim a body. So even though there's these people who, like her found family there, who love her and want to bury her, legally they're not allowed to, so she it's this whole thing. And that bit I found just quite a bit tedious. I didn't love the way she writes dialogue, felt quite clunky and expositional to me, and I just I didn't really vibe with the second half. So I really liked this idea of exploring what's happening to the consciousness and what's happening to the body, but I think, and this is like also just like my personal taste, right? Well, I mean, all of this is my personal taste, isn't it? But particularly this is like, when it was this like thought experiment, I was in it. As soon as it came and it was like real world, like real life plot stuff happening, it just lost me a bit, and I wasn't super into it. I much preferred the writing in the first half to the second half, and I don't know how I feel Elif Shafak. I think I'm leaning towards she's possibly not an author for me, but I have a very good friend, Evie, who we have very, very similar reading taste. Like, there is one author that we diverge on, that we have discovered, and the day that we discovered that we had different opinions about Atessa Moshfegh was a really sad day for me. But she said she has read a book by Elif Shafak that she really likes. I think, is it called My Honor or just Honor? I don't know, Evie, you'll have to tell me which one it is. But Honour, there we go. So I may give Honour a go. I certainly, from what I can tell of how this was handled, I don't think some of her others are going to be for me, like The Island of Missing Trees, and I don't think her latest one, There Are Rivers in the Sky, is going to be for me. But there we go. That is that. So those are the books that I read for the Impatient Reading blog, and I've done a bloody terrible job of talking about them quickly. Sorry. I did a different kind of reading vlog this month. I did the Impatient Reading vlog, and then I tried something new where I just kind of take you along for a random week of my reading and do like a bit more of a like actual reading vlog, like more of like a reading diary thing. So I'm not reading specific books for it. I don't start and finish anything in its entirety within that video, but I'm just sort of like taking you along for the ride. And I enjoyed the process of doing that. I am yet to hear if you enjoyed watching it, so let me know. But I did talk about a few books in that, and they're both audiobooks. So the first one was Evenings and Weekends by Oisín McKenna, which was narrated by Isabel Adamako-Young. I did finish this book in the video, and I talked about it quite a lot there. So if I'm a little brief here, you can probably hear me talk about it more in that video. This is a debut novel, and this is set during a heatwave in London, and I think it's set in 2019? Like, a little bit ago, but not very long ago. And we're following a cast of characters in London over this long weekend that is very hot and oppressive. Once again, themes. And we're principally, the cast of characters that we're following is quite diverse, but we're mostly following a young couple who have just found out that they're pregnant and are having sort of mixed feelings about that. I think they are like pretty happy with the idea of being parents, but they don't have tons of money, and London is expensive, and so they're kind of like worrying about that, and then some cracks sort of start appearing in their relationship, and we find out some things about the male partner that maybe might throw a few spanners in the works. We're also following some kind of like friends of theirs. So her best friend is a queer man who is he's sleeping with his flatmate, but his flatmate is in an open relationship with another man, and there's like a bit of a like throupley polyamorous exploration going on. There's also some perspectives from the parents of those people, so you get a slight intergenerational thing. It's not as well connected, I don't think, as Girl, Woman, Other did it, but it is similar. Like if you enjoyed Girl, Woman, Other, this does a sort of a similar thing, but with a focus that's more on like queer lives necessarily than on like people of colour. On the whole, like and there is a whale in the Thames. So Oisín McKenna moved this. I think this actually happened like a few years earlier than it happens in the book, but there was once a whale stuck in the Thames. And I don't know how I feel about the whale. If you've read this book, how do you feel about the whale? For me, it felt a little bit gimmicky, because I don't really know what. I guess it kind of works metaphorically. A number of the characters in the book, or almost all of them actually, feel stuck or feel unable to escape a situation or get out of a situation that is not good for them, who have sort of found themselves somewhere and wish they weren't there. So I'm like, the whale sort of works as a metaphor for that. I think it's a little bit heavy-handed. I feel like it maybe was there just to be a bit of a point of difference, if I'm being a little unkind. But I think the writing was solid. I really enjoyed the reading experience of it. Although the narrator does a really good job, and I think it's hard doing multi-POV for an audiobook narrator. But she does like a voice for one of the characters, like one of the male characters, that just sounded like such a such a like pantomime of an East London white man, and I couldn't quite, every time she spoke it sounded so different to how the character felt to me. Yeah, other than that, the audio really worked, and I do recommend it. I listened to it on Everand, so I think it's still on there if you subscribe to that, so it will be on there. And yeah, it was a good solid kind of like slice of life in London, and I liked it. I think in the vlog I compared it to Salt Water by Jessica Andrews, so it is a little bit like Salt Water by Jessica Andrews, but with more characters. Yeah, I liked it. I would read more from the author. It's not going to be a favourite book, but I enjoyed it. And then I started and talked about quite a bit another audiobook, The Extinction of Irena Ray by Jennifer Croft, which was read by an author whose name I haven't written down and will put on the screen now. Apologies. And yeah, this was my first book by Jennifer Croft, but she's a writer that I've been interested in for quite a little while, particularly because she's a translator as well. So I think she's an American author who translates from Polish, Ukrainian, and Argentine Spanish. And translation is a big theme in this book, unsurprisingly, possibly. And I didn't really know what to expect from this book, and I still don't really know how I feel about it. It's quite hard. Well, it's not hard to explain, but we cover a lot of ground in this book, so forgive me if I can't talk about this very succinctly. But we are following a team of translators who are the chosen translators of this incredibly well-respected, almost like mythic Polish author called Irena Ray. And when you are a translator for Irena Ray, you only translate Irena Ray, and you are allowed to translate 2 other random, really old Polish poets, one of whom is largely considered to be untranslatable. So she's like, fine, you can translate his work, but you're not allowed to translate for anyone else. You are my translators. And it is very culty, the level of devotion and esteem that these translators have for their author. And every time she has a new book out or she's finished something new, she invites them all to her house, which is like on the Polish border with Belarus, in the forest. And she brings them all there, and they all translate together, like with her there. And they call it like a retreat or something like that. But it's certainly like a very important ritualistic thing that they do. And so they've just arrived. All of the kind of news outlets are talking about how the book that Irena has allegedly just finished and that they're there to translate is like her magnum opus. It's the biggest, best thing that she will have ever written, and she's being touted as the potential next winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature. And that is like an announcement that is coming up, that looms over the book. And so they get to the retreat or her house, and she's just acting kind of weird. And we don't know, obviously, because we don't know Irena. This is our first time meeting her as a reader, but like they're talking about how she's being a bit weird. And the reason we know this is because actually, let me cycle back a little bit, because that's the plot. But we also have to talk about the narrative construction, which I thought was really clever. So the events of the book are being written by the Spanish translator who was there. So it's been written by Spanish. All of the translators are referred to by Irena and to each other, not using their like given first names, but using the language that they translate into. So Spanish is Spanish, English is English, Ukrainian is Ukrainian, Czech is Czech, right? So the book has been written by Spanish, but because the book has been written in English, it has then been translated by English, who was also there and has a different opinion about what happened or what's going on in the events. So we're reading a translation of someone else's work. So you kind of have like the events as told by Spanish, then being reinterpreted by English, and English occasionally like pops up with like footnotes being like, I disagree, this is not how it happened. So there's this kind of unreliability going on, but also this like this idea of translation is like deeply entrenched, not just in like the actual content of the book, but in the book itself. Am I making sense? There's a lot of layers going on in this book. But yeah, so to return back to what the book is actually about, Irena's behaving really weirdly, and then she just disappears and leaves them, and they don't know what to do. They kind of are all falling apart a little bit. They don't know if she's been kidnapped. They don't know if she has left them. They don't know if she's been killed. They don't know if it's like a practical joke or a test, because from what we can tell, she is very manipulative and sort of tests them a lot. And yeah, it's very psychological, but it's one of those ones, it reminded me of like, you know, in like a horror film where you're like watching it being like, why are you doing this? Feels so illogical. Why are you doing this? But because they're so wrapped up in her, like no one goes to the police and like reports her missing because they're so worried that that's not the right thing to do and that Irena would be mad if they went to the police. So they find her manuscript and start translating the manuscript, and sort of like hoping that by translating the manuscript they will solve the riddle of where she's gone. And I enjoyed the book. It was, I think I admired it more than I enjoyed it. There were parts of it where I loved it, and certainly at the beginning I was like, oh my god, I think I'm gonna absolutely love this. There are some directions that it goes in, and like, so Irena is very into like conservation and nature, and so you get these big chunks of the book that are like a lot about that, like going into like the specifics of like mushrooms or whatever, which I'm not averse to. Like, we all hyperfixate on things, right? But I found quite hard on an audio to kind of retain that information but still hold all of the threads of the narrative that were going on. And for some parts of the book I had no idea what was going on, and I don't know if that was me not following or if it was like an intentional, we don't know what's going on. But definitely for parts of it I was like, what? There were some chapters where I re-listened to the start of the chapter like 3 times because I was like, did they just say what? So I'm quite conflicted about this one, because I think it's probably brilliant. I think it probably is great. I don't really know what happened. But sometimes it's one of those ones where sometimes I'm fine with saying like, I really enjoyed that book. I enjoyed the experience of it. I couldn't tell you what it's about. I can't tell you what happened in the end. I just know I enjoyed reading it. It is a little bit that for me, this book. But I think she's clearly an incredibly intelligent writer. Like, there were so many nuances and layers to it. I bet someone could write the shit out of an essay on this. There was so much to like sink your teeth into. So if you are feeling called to read a book that you can just like really, really analyse, I think this would be a good candidate. It was really interesting. She's got a very like funny and wry sense of humour going on through it. On the whole, I think she managed the characters really well. There were a couple of things that annoyed me. The rivalry between Spanish and English, while it was funny to have that in the construction, there was also a rivalry between Irena and another female author, and I was getting a little bit irked that it was only the female characters that seemed to have these very petty, jealous, without really understanding why they're jealous of each other or why they're being antagonistic to each other. Like, the male characters all kind of got along fine, and they were all lovely to each other, and then there were just these 2 pairs of women that just didn't like each other and were really competitive with each other. And I don't know, it's not the nicest thing to read, and if it was supposed to be exposing something about social pressure, encouraging women to be like that, that didn't land for me. It just felt a little bit like women not supporting each other, which, you know, I don't love, if I'm honest. But she's so clever. She's so clever and it's so interesting. I don't know. And then I have 2 collections of poetry to talk to you about. I have finally read some more poetry. The first one was kindly lent to me by my friend Jess, and this is Bargain Bin Rom-Com by Leena Norms. Now, if you are a bookish person on the internet, you may well have come across Leena. She actually does, so she creates content on YouTube and Instagram. She's brilliant, she's very funny. She mostly used to do bookish stuff and has migrated and does kind of like more broad content now. Loads of stuff on climate, positive, what does she call it? Positive panic around climate breakdown. And she's doing this whole amazing thing of like slow fashion and making her own clothes. She like vlogs her like sewing journey and things like that. And I adore her. I love her channel. It's brilliant. And I've never actually read anything that she's written, so Jess lent me this poetry collection, and I'm really glad she did, because it was lovely. I think if you have watched a single one of Leena's videos, when I tell you that her poetry is like funny and irreverent and switched on and doesn't take itself too seriously, I think that will not come as a surprise, because that is the like vibe of Leena's videos, and it's very much the vibe of her poetry too. And I don't have, it's not like my favourite poetry collection that I've ever read, but I really enjoyed it, and some of them I've kind of like written out and because I need to give this back to Jess, and made notes of. But I really did enjoy, Leena does all of these brilliant illustrations as well in there. So like she's got a poem called Text Back, and then wrote that, drew the illustration for it as well, and I really enjoyed that. And it's not necessarily a poetry collection that made me want to like pick up a pen and write the way that some poets do, and the way that the next one I'm talking about did, but it did sort of make me want to like pick up my life and go live it. So like I really liked it for that, and yeah, charming, delightful. And then the second poetry collection that I read this month was Bright Dead Things by Ada Limón. And I mean, she's a very well-known poet. She's the current US Poet Laureate, I think. Current or former? I think current. And this is her first full collection that I've read. So I read a few anthologies, because I love an anthology for finding new poets, because I'm relatively new to reading poetry. Like, I'm not going to say properly. I don't know what that means. What does reading poetry properly mean? It's just poetry. Anyway, but I'm relatively new to kind of like focusing on it. And so I haven't wanted to go and like just buy loads of collections without obviously being sure that I'm gonna like the poetry in it. But a few Ada Limóns had popped up in various collections, and I really liked everything of hers that I'd read, and I absolutely adored this book. It is one of my favourite things that I've read this year, I think. This really did make me, well, it made me want to write, but then it also made me scared to write and be confronted by the fact that I can't write like this. But that's, you know, that's fine too. Everyone's got to start somewhere, right? And I loved it. There is, for me, she toes this line in poetry between the formal and the informal, and between the very poetic and the ordinary, that kind of like line between the ordinary and the sublime. I think she does that so well, like a bit Mary Oliver-y, but like with a bit like more teeth, and and I just, yeah, I loved it. There was this really kind of like accessible thread running throughout the collection. I also, that's partly also what I really like about her. I think she's a brilliant poet, and she's really accessible, I think. If you're like interested in reading poetry but a bit like at some like very avant-garde sort of stuff, where you're worried that you won't understand, I think her poetry is very gettable. It's very understandable, and I mean that as a big compliment. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say about it. I loved it. Shall I read? Do you want to read? Do you want to hear a poem? Shall I read you the first one? I really liked the first one. This is called How to Triumph Like a Girl. I like the lady horses best, how they make it all look easy, like running 40 miles per hour is as fun as taking a nap or grass. I like their lady horse swagger after winning. Ears up, girls, ears up. But mainly, let's be honest, I like that they're ladies. As if this big, dangerous animal is also a part of me, that somewhere inside the delicate skin of my body there pumps an 8-pound female horse heart, giant with power, heavy with blood. Don't you want to believe it? Don't you want to lift my shirt and see the huge, beating genius machine that thinks, no, it knows it's going to come in first? And yes! That's the poetry that I read this month. And then, other things, I listened to 2 historical fiction audiobooks that I really fucking loved. So, the first one was Haven by Emma Donoghue, which was read by Aidan Kelly. And this is my first historical fiction by Emma Donoghue. I've only read book sensation that was Room. That was the only book of Emma Donoghue's that I read, but I did know that she predominantly writes historical fiction. Like Room was a bit of an outlier in her oeuvre. But yeah, I had heard wonderful things about her writing, and I was excited to get to it. And I saw this, I think I finished an audiobook, and I was just like looking on BorrowBox for like something that was available now, and this was available, and I thought, great, I'll listen to some Emma Donoghue. And oh man, I really liked this book. It is set in like 7th century Ireland, and we are following 3 monks. So Art is this incredibly well-respected scholar and priest. He's sort of like, he's a bit famous in the clerical community. And he is visited by a dream that he interprets as God telling him to sort of to leave the world behind, basically, to go and seek solitude, well, not solitude, but to get away from people, to get away from the sins of the world, and to go and set up like a hermitage very far away. And he thinks, okay, that's my mission. I've been given that mission. I'm going to go and do that. But he can't do it on his own because he needs people there to help him and to do it. And so he brings 2 monks with him. He brings the young Trian and Cormac, who's quite elderly. And they go off in a boat to this tiny, tiny island. It's barely an island off the coast of Ireland. And they live there, and it is this very slow, quiet, threatening, just slowly turning the tension up and up and up. And it's this brilliant sort of like excoriation of ego and power dynamics, and why people are driven to do what they do, and the limits of selflessness and the ego that gets bound up in people being quote unquote selfless, and sort of like punishing themselves, and like, oh my god, it dealt with this really insidious cruelty and threat so brilliantly. It has a really great twist in it that I didn't see coming at all, and was really unexpected, and had brilliant rep that I can't talk about without giving it away, but I thought it was done so well. It was like magical, painful. I read this, like, and the next one actually, when it was really hot. We're having like that heat wave that we had kind of like in the middle of July. It was like the perfect antidote to this, because you're just on this miserable tiny island in the Irish Sea. Actually, no, was it? No, it was west, so it would be the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, it was wonderful. I thought, like, there isn't not a huge amount happens in this book. The story is not very full, but it is true, and it feels weighty and real, and I had to like physically restrain myself from like immediately picking up another Emma Donoghue book after I finished reading it. So loved that. Then the second historical fiction book that I read and loved was The Mercies by Kiran Hargrave, which was read brilliantly by the wonderful Jessie Buckley. And this one took me a bit by surprise, because I'd never read Kiran Hargrave before, but I know that I knew her mostly as a children's author, because she does these incredibly beautiful books that are illustrated by her husband is Tom DeFreston, the illustrator, and they have these beautiful books that I keep meaning to like buy for the small people in my life, or maybe just for me. But I'd never read her sort of adult fiction before, and I think this was her first novel for an adult audience. And I loved it. It's set in the 17th century in a place called Finnmark, which is in Norway, but like right at the top, like right in the Arctic Circle. And at the start of the novel, there is this like catastrophic accident. It's basically like a freak storm, and 90% of the men that live in this settlement are killed because they're all out on the fishing boats, and this storm kind of comes from nowhere, and all the men die. And for a little bit, it's just about the women in that village and town sort of getting by and making do without there being men. I mean, they've got like a couple of men still around, like some young boys, a couple of old guys, and like a priesty guy. But basically they're left on their own, and they actually end up sort of flourishing and doing pretty well. It turns out there's a huge amount of running a community that the women can do without the men. And but then the sort of central government finds out that, hang on a minute, there was this accident and there's this just bunch of women just allegedly living by themselves. That sounds super problematic, so like we better go and find out what's going on there. And they send this Scottish guy through the kind of church channels, and he is actually we realise a witch hunter, and he goes on the way, picks up a nice Norwegian bride from this sort of like a shipping port. She's like a merchant's daughter, and goes off to this village to sort of reassert order, and by order we mean patriarchy and Christianity. And what follows is sort of, it's kind of like The Crucible, but in the Arctic and more sapphic. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I think part of my enjoyment was that I didn't have any expectations going into the book. I saw it there on BorrowBox and thought, I'll give that a go. I think I made an assumption that an author who writes predominantly children's like middle grade and then YA, I think she's written as well, might be quite like story centered, and I tend to find, although this wasn't the case with Haven, that I do better with like a story led audiobook, because it helps me kind of stay in it a little bit more and stay a bit anchored. And I mean, I wasn't wrong about that, because the story does move along, and we follow two perspectives principally. So Marn, who is a young girl from the village, and her mother becomes very enamoured with the new Christian Scottish guy who comes in, and Marn is really not. Marn is very concerned for her late brother's former partner, who has just given birth to a child, but she's also Sami, which is the indigenous peoples of that area, who were already being pretty badly treated, but with the arrival of the Christians, their sort of traditional ways and customs are really being stamped out. So Marn's very concerned about that, and she's also very interested in the other main female character in the book, who is the wife of the Scottish guy who comes along. I mean, he's got an actual title, but in my head he's just the Scottish guy. But yeah, so we also hear from her, and she's like adjusting and finding out. She really didn't know anything about this guy before her father basically arranged her marriage, and she's sort of discovering it, but she's also grown up in, like, compared to where they're living, like relative luxury. She was pretty middle class, doesn't know how to cook and clean, because she had sort of like, they had domestic help in her house, so she's sort of like struggling a little bit, and then her and Marn get to know each other a little bit more, and it is I thought it was so good. I thought it was so good. There's like loads of plot stuff that happens that I'm obviously not gonna spoil, but yeah, I thought it was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. I soft launched my love for this book because I accidentally snuck it into tier ranking the best books I read in the first half of the year, which I'll link in the description box down below, which technically I shouldn't have included because I read it in July rather than June, but I read it like really at the start of the month, and it has stayed with me, and I remember still quite a lot about it, which for me is a big deal. So yeah, that was The Mercies by Kiran Hargrave. I don't know how much else she's written for an adult audience actually, but I definitely give it a go. I enjoyed it so much that I considered reading her YA work, and I'm not snobby about YA, it's just I don't tend to enjoy it, but maybe I'll give her YA a go. Let me know if you've read other things by Kiran Hargrave, because I really liked that. And then I have two final books, both sort of outliers in terms of the content that I talk about on my channel, really, because they're both fantasy. In fact, the first one, yes it is, it's a romantasy. Jesus. I read the 5th book in the ACOTAR series, For My Sins, A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. Here's the thing. I know that lots of people read these books and love them, and there's lots of people who talk about them on the internet. I also know that I'm not a typical, this isn't what I typically read, and it's not what you guys typically read, because when I talk about these books, because I used to vlog my reading experience of them, and like everyone was like, I mean, no one said this, you said this in your lack of views, we're not interested in this, which is fine. But I have been enjoying I like to pepper in with my reading things that are just very unlike what I normally read, and I'm not implying that it's like easier or fluffier or less worthy. I'm just saying, like, the fact that it is very different to what I normally read feels like my brain is getting like a little like novelty kick. And I enjoyed it. Like, I'm not going to pretend that I know a lot about this genre. I'm not going to say that this is a particularly good example of the genre, because I don't know that much about it. I will say this is the 5th one, and it was by far my favourite of the ones. And apparently, from what I can tell from TikTok, is people tend to fall into like 2 camps. They either love the 2nd one or the 5th one. I liked this one. This is following a different sister to the first 4 books. All follow Feyre, and this one follows her older sister Nesta, who's an absolute arsehole. And I much more enjoyed reading Nesta's perspective than Feyre's. I think Nesta and Cassian are a better romantic couple than Rhys and Feyre, and I will die on that hill. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Like, if you disagree, I feel sorry for you, because it must suck to be so wrong. The final book that I read this, well, it was not the final book that I read this month, but the last book I'm going to be talking about is Winter's Heart, which is the 9th book in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. I started reading this series in lockdown 4 years ago. I'm now 9 books in. I think there are... is it 14 plus the prequel, or is it 13 plus the prequel? Yeah, 14 plus a prequel. So I'm like breaking the back of it, but I was a bit reluctant to pick this up because I have been, as I said, enjoying my little holidays into fantasy, and I haven't read anything from this series in over a year when I picked this one up. So I was real concerned, because I am not a plotty girl, that that I'd let too much time pass and that it was going to be impossible. And 2 things helped me in this. Firstly, Daniel Green. Thank God for Daniel Green. Daniel Green is a creator on YouTube. He predominantly talks about speculative fiction, so science fiction and fantasy. And he has a series of really old videos, I think, but he does full plot summary breakdowns of every book in this series. So every time I start one, I watch like the previous book, and they're so helpful, and I would not have got in 9 books into this series without it. And so there's that, number 1. And also, I have just got more comfortable with being okay with not knowing who people are. In an epic fantasy series like this, there are so many fucking characters. There are so many. And sometimes there'll be a chapter following following some guy. I don't know who he is. I know I should know who he is. But I'm like, I'm going to see what happens in this chapter. If it looks like he's going to become way more involved in the action, I might Google it. But basically, I'm okay with not knowing. I'm okay. I'm alright with it. I don't mind. Because I'm never going to hold all of this in my head. Impossible. I don't have the brain for it. But yeah, I actually enjoyed this a surprising amount, given that I've heard a lot of, even the fans of this series, pan this one and say it was really sloggy. I actually didn't find it so sloggy, but I wonder if that's because I hadn't just read one of the other ones that maybe were like a little bit more pacey. But what I will say is, I always have the eternal complaint that this man can't write women. He can't write women. He can't write romance. That's okay. That's all right, because that's not really... I mean, it's not all right. Please write women better, but you know, it's okay in that most of the book isn't really like... It's not really about... Not that it's not about women. It's actually got a nice big female cast. I like the inclusion of women in here. I am not calling him a misogynist. I just think he doesn't really... He's not so much a character writer in general, actually. He's not very good at the internal life. He's brilliant at the world building and the interconnectedness and the journeys and the like themes. Great, love it. On an individual character basis, sometimes they all feel a little bit like... I don't even know what the word is, but that series of facial expressions is what they feel like. And he also does this thing. I can't remember if he's done this in another book. I think he has. This book opened with like quite a big plot thing. Like something happened to a character, but because there's such a wide cast, there's like action happening over here, 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 and here, and here, and here. And over the course of the book, you kind of like go around all of it. It's not like you follow like one character. So something happens over here that's like a real big deal, in my opinion. We didn't go back there at all in this book. Just, I assume we'll get there in the next one, maybe in book 11. But he just left it. He was like, I'm not gonna tell you what happened over there. Other stuff's happening over here, and I'm like, I get it, but that seemed kind of big. Anyway, The Wheel of Time, Winter's Heart, book 9, read. And those are the books that I read in the month of July. I would love to know what you have read this month. What's been the best? Have you had any surprises? Have you read any of these? Do you disagree? Do you agree with anything that I've said? Do you have poet recommendations based on how much I loved the Ada Limón? Have you read Kiran Millwood Hargrave? Where should I go next with Emma Donoghue? I think I have The Pull of the Stars on my shelf downstairs, but I've also heard wonderful things about Learned by Heart. I also want to read The Wonder because I've watched the film of that, but I've already forgotten everything that happened. So many options, guys. So many options. This has been July. I have been talking for a really long time. I'm gonna love you and leave you. If you can give this a thumbs up, that would be really kind.